Recording progress.
Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the Radiant Torah with the teachings of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. And we want to begin by thanking Dr. Eleanor Gaudis for sponsoring this mini lesson. And today we're going to dedicate it to all the people in Miami. Please, Hashem, they should be able to rescue more people. Israel has had amazing luck with this. I shouldn't use the word luck. They've had amazing good fortune from Hashem with this, but really pulling people out of rubble over time. So please, God, let that be the situation. And for all the families who are really struggling with this, we hope that situation is resolved very soon. It's a very painful situation. Okay, so this week we are going to be learning Parshas Pinchas. However, in order to learn Parshas Pinchas, we're going to have to discuss what happened in last week's Parsha, which we really didn't touch on at the end of Parshas Balak. And in Parshas Balak, in the last part, we learn that the children of Israel camped in the desert, and they began in this place called Shittim to engage in improper relations with, unfortunately, it says the daughters of Moab, but the Midrash tells us that it was primarily the daughters of Midian. Okay. And what we want to understand about what was going on and why this is so essential to our story, we're going to have to really explore the Midrash a little bit. So, first of all, Balak, who was the king of Moab, commanded even his own daughter to go and seduce the Jews. Okay, so the Midianites and the Moabites sent their daughters to seduce the Jewish men. And what would happen is that they came into the area where the Jews were encamped, and they set up like a bazaar or a street fair, and they would station outside these little tents, which ostensibly had things for sale inside, old women, elderly women, okay, who would be displaying some merchandise. And the merchandise would be very, very expensive. And when the Jews would come to buy, when the men especially would come to buy, the women would say, you know, we have real bargains inside the tents. Why don't you go inside and take a look? Inside the tent, they would find a Midianite woman, very attractive and young, and she would begin to talk with the person who came in to look at the wares and say things like, oh, I don't understand why we can't all be friends. Why do we have to be so separated? Let's get together. As a matter of fact, we're really all we all come from Abraham's father, Terach. We're all cousins. So let me give you a gift. And she would give him something free. And then she would say, why don't you sit down and eat something? And then she'd say, listen, I know you can't eat our food, you keep kosher, but here's a chicken or here's a sheep. You slaughter it the way you want, and I'll prepare it for you, or we'll prepare it together and we'll sit down and eat. Then in the meantime, she would give them a glass of wine. Now, one of the interesting laws that wasn't at that time a law is that a Jew is not allowed to drink yayin, wine that is that has been prepared by a non-Jew. Why? Okay, so the reason is that wine and also grape products, especially grape juice, are used for idolatrous services. Certainly still today, not picking on anyone, but still today in the Catholic Church, this is the case. Okay, so at this time, this wasn't a law. So a Jew could drink the wine of a non-Jew. It wasn't yet a law. Okay, so they would drink, and then he would get intoxicated, and we know what happens next. So she would be just on the verge of this seduction, and she would say to the Jew, listen, I want to get together with you. Okay, these were obviously very immoral women. I want to get together with you, but first you have to worship my idol. And who was their idol? Who did they worship? Baal Peor. Who was Baal Peor? Baal Peor was this very disgusting form of worship where the person, in order to worship this god, would relieve themselves, excrement, everything. That was the form their worship took. Okay, that is how you worship their deity. So, like a normal person thinks, well, that's just ridiculous. However, the reasoning behind this, or reasoning in the twisted terms of the Midianites and the Moabites, the reasoning behind this is because this worship was about really cementing the fact that this world was nothing. There was no end to this world except for pleasure. You have pleasure, and then the pleasure it's excreted from your body or relieved from your body in one way or the other, and that's the whole point of life. That's the point of life, is to have pleasure. Okay, any kind of pleasure. So you can understand why this particular deity should have been so revolting to the Jews. After, I mean, it's hard to say with the same breath, these are the people who were just taken out of Egypt, a long time before, but just had received the Torah directly, from Moshe, at Har Sinai, heard Hashem's voice, constantly were witnessing miracles, and they were going to stoop to this kind of idolatry. So the horrible thing was they did. Many of the Israelites did. Now, there's a question about whether these were the Erev Rav or not. In a way, it's immaterial because we were all together in the desert, and the end result was this began to affect all of us. Okay. Mostly the Jews who stumbled in this area were from the tribe of Shimon, okay, which is going to lead into the next part or the next Parsha. So they had this really revolting kind of worship, and then they would have relations. And what began to happen was a plague. So Hashem sent a plague as a judgment on the Jewish people. Okay. When the Jews don't act accordingly to our internal capacity, and our internal capacity is really the capacity of the neshama to align with Hashem and his Torah, Hashem will send a correction. Now, you may have heard that when we look around the world and we see an earthquake or a tsunami in Japan, or a volcano somewhere else, or another natural disaster of some kind, the commentaries will tell us, okay, Chazal will tell us that we should be looking at this and saying it as a warning to us. Hashem in his mercy is sending a natural disaster to remind us that we need to get with the program. We need to shape up. We need to try to come closer to Hashem. from wherever we're holding, from wherever we're at, we need to take that next step into Hashem's, embrace, and ourselves embrace the Torah. Okay. However, at this point in time, okay, at this particular juncture, it was so obvious when Jews stepped out of line, there would be immediate judgment. Today, we don't see it as immediately. We see it sometimes in the distance and sometimes up close. Things happen to the Jewish people that are terrible. But we don't necessarily see it with the expediency that took place during the times in the Midbar. There was a negative act, the Jews stepped out of line, and Hashem sent down a judgment. Hey, get back into shape. Okay, this is not good. So anyway, a plague descended. And at this time, okay, as this was all taking place, there was a man from the tribe of Shimon named Zimri. And Zimri, I want to actually look into the Chumash. Okay. Zimri went and he had a relationship with a Midianite woman. Who was this Midianite woman? Her name was Cosbi, and she was actually the princess of the king of Midian. So that's how corrupt the Midianites and the Moabites were. They would use their own daughters essentially as prostitutes in order to destroy the Jewish people. Particularly the Midianites had the more intense hatred for the Jews, which is, by the way, why they were why the Jews were told to wipe them out completely later on in the next Parsha. But particularly, the Midianites had such a profound hatred for the Jews that they would stoop to any level. So Zimri somehow flipped out, and he said in front of everyone, I'm having relations with this woman, and he dragged her into a tent. She was like, yep, see y'all later. So Pinchas saw this. Who was Pinchas? Pinchas was the son of Eleazar, who was the son of Aaron HaKohen. One of the important key facts about Pinchas is that he was not a Cohen. He was not a priest. Why? Because when Hashem gave Aaron HaKohen the priesthood, only the grandchildren who weren't born yet, the men who weren't born yet, could be priests. Previously, Pinchas had been born already, and the priesthood was dependent on descendants, not someone who already was born. So Pinchas wasn't a Cohen. However, he was a very, very righteous person. He was, after all, the grandson of Aaron HaKohen. And Pinchas, when he saw what happened here, let me just find my paper, my notes. When he saw what happened here, he grabbed the sword and he took this sword and he ran into the tent. And while they were in the midst of this relations going on, Pinchas took this spear and stabbed Cosbi and Zimri through the gut, killing them both instantly. Or there's a debate about whether it's instantly. So this immediately halted the plague for, excuse me one moment, please. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, so just a disturbance. So meanwhile, the plague was stayed. So 24,000 people had already died from this whole immoral escapade. Can you imagine? That's a huge number of people. But right afterwards, Hashem stayed the plague. He stayed the plague. He stopped the plague because of Pinchas's righteous act. Okay, so this is leading up to the beginning of the next Parsha, Parsha's Pinchas, the Parsha that we're in. And this is where we learn that Hashem gave Pinchas the kahuna, the priesthood. He and his descendants would now be made priests. And we learn the name of the slain Israelite man, Zimri, who was Ben Salu, and Cosbi, Bastsur, and we learn a little details about them. And then Hashem spoke to Moshe immediately after and said, go chase down the Midianites and wipe them out because they harassed you. Okay, and because their daughter and so on. So we're getting up to this point, and we get to the point where Pinchas is rewarded for having killed 2 people. Okay, and then immediately after that, the Jews are told to chase after the Midianites and smite them, wipe them out, really. And then after that, a census is taken, which is the final census in the Midbar. Okay, and we've discussed censuses in the past. And after that, we get the lottery for inheriting the land of Israel. And after that, we get, what do we get after that? The daughters of Zelophehad. So we're right at the juncture now with Pinchas. And here's where I want to discuss a couple of topics. The first is judgment. Okay, so there was a judgment being made here. And we learn from Rebbe Nachman in Likutey Moharan, Tinyana, lesson 241, that when someone is facing harsh judgments, what's a harsh judgments? What are dinim? These are when a person is being pursued. He's either being pursued by enemies, he's being pursued by, God forbid, illness like this plague, he's being pursued by creditors, he's in debt, whatever it is, this person is facing harsh judgments. Okay, family problems, all these terrible things. Okay, but Rebbe Nachman explains that when a person, just like the Jews were being destroyed by a plague, which was a judgment, right? When another person, when a human being comes along and begins to also pile on that person, the strict dinim, the harsh judgments, go away. What does that mean? So let's say you're facing a lot of problems. Let's just like put this in real terms. You're facing a lot of problems. There was an earthquake and your car was swallowed up and whatever, a lot of problems, and you have to get your tooth pulled, and okay, let's not make them too serious. And then somebody comes along, somebody from your community comes along, let's say, and comes after you and says, you owe me money, and I'm going to tell everybody that you owe me money. All of a sudden, these strict judgments are going to depart from you. All of a sudden, when a person chases you down, the dinim that don't use a human being as an agent will be lifted. Why? Rebbe Nachman explains that the negative judgments are coming from heavenly sources directly. But when heaven, or when the Sitra Achra, the other side who's acting for heaven, is sending all these harsh things your way, and a human being comes along, he can let go. Why? Because a human being is merciless. And these strict heavenly judgments always have mercy included in them. But when a person wants vengeance, watch out, okay? Because a human being will pursue you harder than any heavenly court. This is the reasoning. Therefore, the negative judgments that are pouring down on you can relax and go away, because they could say, we don't have to do this anymore. We're going to leave it in the hands of a person, because a person is really rotten and we're not even as rotten as a person. We know they're going to take care of this for us. Sounds like a crazy reasoning, but think about it. Think about it. Who is the least merciful? Hashem or a human being? A human being. Okay. Hashem always forgives. A human being who has worked on themselves has a hard time forgiving, has a hard time letting go, has a hard time not seeking vengeance. Okay. Has a hard time letting go of revenge, which is why so many of our prayers in our siddur are about letting go of judgments and revenge on another human being. We want to work on ourselves so that we're not the agent of judgment in this world. So Rebbe Nachman says that when a tzaddik who is looking out for the world, taking care of the Jews, he loves us, sometimes opposes someone else, even another tzaddik, he might be doing it intentionally to lift judgments from him. But then in the long run, okay, this is a tzaddik level vengeance, not regular people level vengeance. He's going to be giving compassion to the person that he caused suffering to. Okay. If you have questions, we can discuss this further at the end, or you can type in the chat. So this idea is that a tzaddik doesn't do judgment the way a regular human being does. A tzaddik does judgment, okay, and pursues vengeance and revenge. A tzaddik does this with compassion. His real motivation is compassion, which is why Rebbe Nachman said, don't let, well, it's one of the reasons why, there's a few reasons, don't let machlekes, don't let the conflicts between the tzaddikim worry you. This one says to do this way, this one says to do this that way. Don't let it trouble you at all, ignore it, okay? Don't let these things bother you. Listen to your rabbi, okay? That's all. And don't get involved in conflict, but know that sometimes the tzaddik will oppose someone else for a reason. So Pinchas, we know, was a tzaddik, okay? As a matter of fact, we can infer this from knowing what came afterwards, which was the census. That was the next act after Hashem told Moshe to go wipe out the Midianites, okay? The next act was the census. Hashem, what does Hashem do? He counts who he loves. And we learn the implicit ideas is that all his people were righteous. Everybody was a tzaddik. Pinchas for sure was a tzaddik. He was the son of Elazar, the grandson of Aaron Cohen. So Rebbe Nachman tells us explicitly in the lesson that Pinchas had tremendous rachamim, tremendous mercy and compassion on the Jewish people. And he knew that to alleviate this judgment and bring mercy and end the plague, he had to directly kill himself, these immoral people. He didn't want to per se. It wasn't like he had a vengeance that was bloodthirsty, but he had a vengeance and a righteousness for the sake of Hashem. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what is this vengeance, what is fanaticism, and how can we make sense of that in today's terms. So it's like this. Today, most of us probably don't have a great enough understanding of what Hashem truly wants for us in order to take revenge. Certainly not against our brothers and sisters. That for sure we're not allowed to do. So no matter what you're going through in your personal life, there's a fine line sometimes between achieving justice and having your basic rights met, and crossing the line into revenge and vengeance. And today, most of us aren't capable of really understanding that line. So we have to be very cautious to not seek revenge. We really have to be careful, including revenge against non-Jews. Okay, because sometimes non-Jews cause us problems. Sometimes it's our neighbor that causes us a problem, whatever it is. Revenge and vengeance isn't the answer. Does it mean that sometimes something that might look like vengeance is actually not vengeance? Yes. So I'm going to give an example. When terrorists fire bombs, thousands and thousands of bombs, Hamas fired 4,000 bombs, they call them rockets, into Israel this summer. And when Israel goes and it drops a bomb on a building where the rockets are coming from, that is called a deterrent. That's not vengeance. And Jews are very careful to never celebrate the death of their enemies. So if you remember from previously in the Torah, that we were not allowed to celebrate the death of the Egyptians with joy. We could celebrate our freedom from them and that they were wiped out, they could no longer harm us, but we weren't allowed to be joyful about it. Jews don't do that. That's not what Jews do. We're not allowed. Okay. And this is a level of humanity that should be an example to everyone. And we should try to be that example. When it comes to our interpersonal things, look, people's feelings get hurt all the time. There are big issues, like God forbid divorce, okay? There are little issues like your friend said something and they annoyed you. And someone who hasn't imbibed this message might lash out in revenge, usually verbally, sometimes legally, okay? However, we're not allowed to do that. That is not the kind of vengeance that Pinchas displayed. So what is the core difference? So the core difference is there's vengeance for Hashem, and then there's revenge for our own satisfaction. Okay, you know the expression, revenge is a dish best served cold. Okay, in other words, cool down first. Put your thinking cap on and don't lash out. Don't lash back. We've all done it. Okay, maybe you haven't, but I've done it. We're human, but we have to train ourselves not to. Okay, and when we get close, when we will hit, God willing, Tzalachad's daughters later on, we'll learn a lot about how we as women can respond and react to things from them because they were role models for us. So anyway, that's a key lesson from Rebbe Nachman about this idea of judgment and vengeance. And we know for everyone who says Kriya Shema, the Shema al Hamita, the prayers before you go to bed at night, a key prayer in that, as a matter of fact, in the Sepharad edition, the Hasidic edition of the Siddur, it's basically the opening prayer in which we ask Hashem to not punish anyone on our account. That even goes further. Not only are we not taking revenge, we don't even want Hashem to punish someone or to get revenge for us. Why? Okay. So on the lofty level, why? Is because we don't want to see anybody suffer, even somebody who's harmed us, who we don't get along with. However, there's a deeper level. The Baal Shem Tov tells us that when a person has the opportunity to look at another human being, okay, and judge them on the side of merit and say, you know what, they probably didn't mean what they did. And even if they did, I'm sure they do so many good things. They're probably such a tzaddik inside that I can't see. I totally don't see any bad in them. I'm not looking at any bad in them. I'm only looking at the good. And when we are able to do that, we have, in effect, not only given them a pass, we've given ourselves a pass. Because the Baal Shem Tov tells us, whenever we are in the throes of our own personal heavenly court case, that's the language he uses, and there's a judgment impending up above, and we are shown someone in which we can make a harsh judgment on them, and we don't think negatively about them, or okay, we see they've done something bad. It happens. We don't necessarily say the act is good, okay, but we understand that the person themselves at their core is a holy neshama, and they messed up. And we give them a pass. We make an excuse for them. We say, I only want to look at their good. I want to look away from their bad. When we do that, we have given ourselves an innocent verdict, and the judgment up above against us is null and void. We have literally tried our own court case. We've been on the stand, the witness, and the judge all in one. And then when we've done that, we alleviate some of the own judgment coming down on us. There's a lot about this topic of judgment in Rebbe Nachman's teachings, because it's so important to understand why we have to, as the Tzaddikim say, circumcise our hearts, take that tough shell off our hearts. And even if it hurts, even if it makes us vulnerable, to look at the other person with a good eye. And by the way, this doesn't mean that people don't do terrible things to each other. It's not excusing the action. It's excusing the human being. And there's a difference. Okay, and there's so much more about this for another time. Now, next, I promised I would talk about fanaticism. I can't remember who asked me, but somebody said to me that Pinchas was a fundamentalist. And this just goes to show you, I know who it was. Okay, she's not here today, but she'll watch the video. Pinchas was a fundamentalist, fanatic lunatic. And that's the turnoff with people who follow the Torah. So I would really like to jump in and express very, very clearly that there really isn't such a thing as Jewish fundamentalism. Okay, that's really a non-Jewish concept. And it comes from people who don't know how to read the Torah because they don't have the oral Torah. So they're taking every single word literally. Do we read the Torah literally, word for word? Do we take all this as true? Yes, on the one hand. But on the other hand, even the pshat, even the simple meaning or the literal meaning may have a very different reality. For example, when you speak about, an eye for an eye, it doesn't mean that. The oral Torah clarifies and says it means if somebody takes your eye out or whatever, you give them a monetary compensation that equals an eye. So we have the oral Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, everything. We have that which was given to Moshe on Har Sinai, the same time that he was getting the tablets, the written Torah. And you can't have one without the other, because the oral Torah is the explication and explanation and the clarification of the written Torah. So first of all, there really isn't such a thing as Jewish fundamentalism. It's really a Christian concept, and probably, I would say, an Islamic concept. Next, what about, there are some fringe groups who maybe take the Torah literally. So there are people who are non-Jews called Karaites, who, there still exist some of them, who do read the Torah literally, and they don't believe in the oral Torah. So they only eat cold food on Shabbos. Why? Because the Torah says, don't light a fire in your camp on Shabbos, don't cook. However, we know the oral Torah explains to us, no, you cook the food ahead of time and you keep it warm. That's fine. You have to have a hot meal in honor of Shabbos. As a matter of fact, Jews all over the world, from Yemen to Russia to Canada to Israel to former Soviet Union, to wherever, to South America, to Persia, Jews, Iran, all over the world have a hot meal Shabbos morning when they come home from shul. Or sometimes it's called lunch, but it's really a morning meal. They have a hot meal. They have some form of a hot meal. Okay. It might be a hot bready meal. Like I think the Yemenites have this delicious thing with a lot of, fatness. Very good. And then there might be cholent, and it might be dafina, and it might be all these different kinds of things. Okay. The reason why Jews are so committed to the mitzvah of that, why it's become a mitzvah in a way, is because we're showing that we're not Karaites. The Karaites don't eat a hot meal Shabbos day, so we do. We want to show that we recognize the oral Torah. That, as a matter of fact, is the prime motivation behind eating cholent. Okay. The prime motivation is we are not Karaites. We believe in the oral Torah. Okay. We understand that the Torah without the oral Torah is just a guide. There's not enough in there to really understand. So that takes care of fundamentalism with the Karaites. Then sometimes there are groups of Jews, it happens, they get very extreme, very off the rails. Okay, what can we say? There are the exceptions to the rule. However, we know that most Torah authorities, the vast majority, 99.9% say, choose a path of moderation and walk that path of moderation. Don't be a fanatic. Don't also be the other extreme, but be sure that you choose that path. Okay. And what happens is that with this choice, there can be differences of opinion. So for example, what will happen is somebody will look at someone else and say, oh, they're a fanatic, because they're a little bit to the right of them. And then somebody a little to the left of them, oh, they're a bum. They're not as religious as I am. This isn't how it's supposed to play out. How it's supposed to play out with this idea is that the path of moderation is largely individual. Even within a community that has a moderate path, or a path on one side or the other, even a path that seems restrictive, we don't know what the right path is for the right person. The only possible way you can know is to work on yourself. And maybe if you're so blessed, you will find out what level of moderation is right for you. And I'll tell you something else. Rebbe Nachman says a secret. He says you should be moderate, everything in moderation. And then he says it as an aside, but if you really want to serve Hashem, you're going to have to be a little extreme. You're going to have to be a little extreme. You can't be too moderate, because what's required of a Jew is something that's above and beyond moderation. We should want to cling to Hashem. Okay. It doesn't mean that we're fanatics and we're putting down anyone else for their path, but each of us individually should be trying to find the right space for us to serve Hashem, connect with him, love his people, love our brothers and sisters, be good to everyone, follow the Torah, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, this balance, this balance really is something that everybody kind of has to grow into. And it can shift at different points in your life. Now, the next part of this Parsha gives us some insight into, I missed something. All right, that's okay. We won't have time for it anyway. Next, it gives us some insight into this concept. Okay, and that is the Parsha. That's a part of the Parsha in which there was the census, and then immediately after, a lottery that would determine which tribe got which portion of Eretz Yisrael. So if you remember, everybody was waiting to get into Israel. Okay, you remember the last few Parshas, there's this buildup. And now the land's going to be divided up for each tribe. So how did that work out? So it worked out like this. Moshe took, I don't know, a piece of parchment or a stone and wrote the land portion on it. He knew what the 12 divisions were for the 12 tribes, and he put a portion on it. And then each tribe, the leader of each tribe would reach in, okay, and pull out. It was a lottery. It was a goral, a lottery, okay, and they would reach in and pull out this portion of land. So why was it done this way? Why didn't Hashem just say to Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu, here's what I want. I want God to have this land and Reuven to have this bit of land and so on and so forth. Why didn't he do that? So Medrash tells us that Hashem wanted it to be purely from him. What does that mean? Everything's purely from Hashem. So this is a matter of perception. So if Moshe told everybody, Moshe's acting in a way as an intermediary, giving over Hashem's words. Everybody knows it's Hashem's words. Nobody doubts it. But it carries a different weight than Hashem's words alone. So a lottery, we understand, has no real human agent. Somebody's reaching in and pulling something out. And we understand that the force behind that is, even if possible, it's really hard to describe because it's all purely from Hashem, but perception-wise, it's purely from Hashem. And so the Medrash tells us, one of the Medrashes tell us that the piece of parchment or whatever, the area of the land would jump into the person's hand. It would jump into their hand. So when the tribe of Reuven went to reach in, the correct portion of land for them would jump into their hand. It wasn't random. Each tribe got exactly the land that they needed. Okay, there are many different commentaries on this, from Rashi to Rambam, about some bigger tribes had more land, smaller tribes had less land, land that was more productive farmland or whatever, that those portions would be smaller. Certain tribes had certain needs and they would get this land or they belonged here. We're not going to go into that today because it's really a whole parsha in itself. But we understand that Hashem is in charge and he determined what each tribe would get. So what does this tell us? This tells us a few things. One of the more beautiful things I've heard was actually from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said that this tells us, and it coincides with what Rebbe Nachman said, who said that this teaches us that a person in this world has a mitzvah that's their particular mitzvah. Rebbe Nachman himself said that people have their own mitzvah that they're drawn to. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, how do you know it's your mitzvah? He said, if it's a mitzvah that's hard for you, that's a mitzvah you should be focused on. Rebbe Nachman takes a different approach. He says you have a mitzvah that you're actually drawn to. He has a more chesed approach. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was more critic in some ways. And so, hold on, Charlene must have got dropped out. I don't know why all those pinging sounds are happening, but okay. So anyway, Charlene, are you still co-host? Let's see. No, I have to make her co-host now. Okay. All right. So anyway, this idea is we each have a mitzvah that pulls us. And the Rebbe Nachman says that that's the mitzvah we should do all the mitzvahs, but that's a mitzvah that we should maybe make a special effort with, okay? You might find it's more than one mitzvah. Okay, so you make a special effort. Maybe it's Shabbos, maybe it's making the table beautiful, maybe it's making challah, maybe it's sukkahs, who knows whatever it is that you're drawn to. Maybe it's tefillah, prayer. So that's a mitzvah that we're drawn to. And the mitzvah that we're drawn to is the mitzvah that's our lottery. It's our goral. Okay, it was given to us by Hashem, specifically for our neshama, in the same way that the land of Israel was divided up specifically, purposefully, for each tribe's spiritual and physical needs. The beauty of this lottery teaches us that whatever we need, we're getting it. We have to look around and understand that, that Zvulun didn't go look at Naphtali and say, hey, I want your portion. This is the portion that was chosen by the lottery, by the goral. This was the portion directly from Hashem. And the lottery teaches us that our portions also are directly from Hashem. And there's an old little mashal that goes like this. Somebody's walking around, they're schlepping around a big sack of worries. They're very stressed out. And they go to this Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, listen, you want to be relieved from your burden? We'll solve it for you. And he takes them over to a heavenly abode, and they come in, and there's all these sacks on the grounds. And in each sack of various problems. One sack has unhappy family relationships. One has sick family members, God forbid. One has poverty. One has this, one has that. They have a whole bunch of different things in them. And the Rebbe says to the tzaddik says to the person, he says, you can leave your sack of worries and troubles here, and you get to choose someone else's. Take someone else's. So they go and they peek in the bag, and they look and they say, I don't want that. And then they look at another one. I don't want that. And then he realizes that the portion of difficulties that he's facing are the right ones for him. They're the ones that help him grow. They're the ones that help us grow. They're our lot. They're our portion. Okay. So Ashreinu, right? Ashreinu. We are fortunate. We are fortunate to have this portion, each of us, because it's helping us grow and it's helping us come closer to Hashem. Okay, now we want to get to Salafhad's daughters. And hold on one second. Let me look at my notes. Oh, okay. So what happens here? So Salafhad's daughters come up. After the land is given out, just one second. After the land is given out, it's given out to the tribes, and then to the tribes, each family. What happened is that there were 5 daughters of a man named Salafhad, and he had a widow as well. And Salafhad, the Midrash tells us that he probably was the person who violated Shabbos, and he passed away younger than he should have. And he had 5 daughters: Machla, Chagla, Noah, Milka, and Tirza. Okay. Today, sometimes you hear people use those. Some of those names are a little trendy. So all these daughters were almost 40 years old, and they were single. Okay. And as a compliment to them, it's not a negative. The Torah tells us that they were single and they were approaching 40. The reason they were single is because they were very learned women. They knew Torah, they studied Torah, they were intelligent, they were very righteous. Each one was a tzaddikus, and they couldn't find a man, okay, each one of them without a father to help them make the shidduch, couldn't find a man that was at their level. So they decided to remain single until they found the right one. And this is considered to be a compliment, okay? Now we know in other places in the Torah that that's not a compliment. Okay, but they didn't find, let's just leave it at, they didn't find their Bashar. None of them found their soulmate. And when they heard Moshe explain that the land is distributed according to the males, okay, the sons, they were upset. They said, well, our father had no male heir. Okay, and his name will be forgotten, and whatever mistakes he made, he was still a tzaddik for his lifetime. You know, he made an error, yes, but he was still a tzaddik, and his name is going to be forgotten. And because no male heir is going to receive a portion in the land of Israel. Okay, and since we don't have brothers, we should be able to take this land. It should be ours. Okay. So they were descended from, they were actually in the tribe of Menashe, which is really the overarching tribe of Yosef. But anyway, they were descendant of Yosef. So anyway, they went and they knew that they could ask Moshe for land personally. However, and they could get land on the east side of the Jordan, of the Jordan. However, they loved the land so much that it wasn't about the land. It wasn't about give me land, give me money. Okay, it was about, because land equals money. Okay, that's not what it was. It was about we love the Holy Land. We want a part of that. We want to live there. Okay, so they approached Moshe. Actually, first they approached the judge. They went to judge after judge, and finally they came before Moshe. And there was I'm not going to go in the laws of Yibum and whatever, but what we do know is that they were praised, even though they were they certainly embraced sneot, okay? Sneas. They were very modest. It's not like they wanted to make a big scene and scream and be pushy, okay? Men also shouldn't do that. But it's not that they wanted to do that. It's that they loved Israel so much they wanted a portion for themselves. So they went and they in a very modest, eloquent, intelligent, soft-spoken, and well-spoken manner pled their case. And they stuck up for their father. And Moshe said, you're not entitled to a portion of land. I'm sorry, because according to Torah, a girl isn't an heir. Women aren't heirs. Daughters aren't heirs. And then the daughters of Salafchad said, well, wait a second. If girls aren't heirs, then our mother could marry one of our father's brothers, and then she'll have a son, and he will inherit our father's portion. Our father's name won't be wiped out. That's what Yibum is. Okay, I won't go into too many details. But Moshe says once there are daughters, Yibum no longer applies. That law no longer applies. So meanwhile, the daughter says, well, if our status is equal to sons as far as Yibum is, okay, once we're born, Yibum doesn't count, where a woman, a widow, would marry her husband's brother in order to perpetuate his name and have children for him. If we're the same, if we're held by this, like just like boys are for this, why aren't we the same when it comes to land and inheritance? We should be the same. And Moshe Rabbeinu was stumped. He didn't know. He forgot the law. He didn't know the law. He never heard the argument before. It's an amazing thing. Moshe Rabbeinu, our greatest tzaddik, certainly the one who knew the Torah most intimately. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes even a tzaddik may have a moment where Hashem obscures a law from them for a particular reason. So what are these laws of inheritance? I do want to go over them. I think they're important. Okay. The Torah laws of inheritance are, if a man dies, his sons equally divide his possessions, except for the firstborn. The Bechor, the firstborn, gets a double portion. Okay. And what we have to understand is that most people adhere to these laws today, with some variations and some leniencies in certain cases. If there are male heirs, a daughter doesn't get a share. Okay. However, if there are no sons today, now daughters inherit. Okay. If there are no children living, but they left descendants, the descendants, like if they're grandchildren, they inherit the same way. So the grandsons would inherit and not the granddaughters. However, if there are no grandsons, then the daughters and granddaughters, and so on and so forth. There's more about paternal ancestors and paternal brothers and so on. So what is this law? And why is this a Torah law? So the idea is like this, is that when a woman determines a child's Jewish state of Judaism. Okay. If a Jewish woman has a baby with a non-Jew, the child is still Jewish, but the child doesn't necessarily have a tribe they belong to, because tribe is determined paternally. So with these laws of inheritance, they're related to this. Why? Because when a woman marries, she becomes part of her husband's tribes. If you remember previously, I think a couple of parshas ago, we discussed this idea that people used to marry within their tribes. And now today, or post the midbar, they didn't have to anymore. Okay. So a woman will then become part of her husband's tribe. And because if you look at a kasuba, a marriage contract, a man has a tremendous amount of obligation, okay, to support his wife. So a man is obligated to give to a woman in one way, and he's obligated to give to his sons in another way, with the understanding that the daughter's husband is going to take care of her in her lifetime. Okay. Now, some of the difficulties that I've heard people have with this Torah law is, well, it's not fair. Why isn't it divided between boys and girls equally, or sons and daughters equally? So the idea is that a woman, spiritually speaking, and even physically speaking, is made to be like a receiver, and a man is made to be a giver. And the giving will come down the line with the sons, okay, with the sons inheriting, okay? So a woman doesn't have to worry about whether she, I mean, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. There's plenty of, people that don't necessarily follow Torah law who wouldn't follow this anyway, okay? But we understand that a woman by Torah law is taken care of, and a son is taken care of to give. So this is where this comes from. Now, Zelophehad's daughters are notable in that they framed their argument so intelligently with such knowledge, and it says that they are completely free of any self-interest except for their love of the land and their desire to live in the land to serve Hashem. They love Hashem so much that they're willing to go and do something which wasn't the norm at that time, which was to speak out and even plead their case, albeit in a very dignified manner. Okay. So that is in a nutshell, some of the key factors of Parshas Pinchas, with the beginning in Parshas Balak. And does anybody have any questions or comments or anything that they would like to share or say? You can, I don't know if you can speak, but you can chat. Can you speak? No. Okay. So once again, I want to thank Dr. Eleanor Gaudis for sponsoring this this lesson. It's not a mini lesson, this lesson. And look forward to talking more about the Torah next week. We have some really interesting commentary coming up. Tomorrow's Breslov Lunchtime Learning audio class, we're going to begin with an introduction of the 3 weeks. So for anybody who would like to brush up on an understanding of what the 3 weeks and the halachas are, you can call in at 12:30. And thank you, Riet, for your message. And I wish everyone a good week, a peaceful week, and a calm week, a happy week, as happy as we can be during this time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Chaya Rivka. See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.